大家好啊！今日咧我就請咗我個 friend 咧係叫做 Lawrence Chu 啦，佢而家咧就喺上海做緊 Johnson Controls Hitachi 嘅。其實佢哋做 smart building 嘅 user experience design 咯。咁點解今日請佢咧？就係因為咧佢個背景咧其實係 industrial design 嘅喎。咁咧佢就做過 Umbra 啊、Bissell 啦、Bissell 係做呢個 vacuum cleaner 嘅。咁仲有呢個嘅 Nixplay 啦，係 IoT 嘅相架啦。咁佢就會講下佢點樣由 industrial design 啦，跟住而家就做到 user experience 啦。Okay, hi Lawrence. Thanks so much for taking the time to do this interview. Why don't you give the audience a little bit background about what you do now, and then maybe tell us about your history, like how did you came about?
Okay, sure. My name is Lawrence. At the moment, I work with Johnson's Controls Hitachi, and Johnson's Controls Hitachi is a joint venture between Johnson's Controls and Hitachi. And
you're in Shanghai, right?
Yeah, they have a joint venture. Actually, we're global. I'm in the Shanghai office, but the headquarters is in Tokyo, in Kadi in India, and in Shanghai. Mm-hmm. And I help them to manage industrial design, UI, UX, and entire consumer design experience.
Okay.
Yeah, nutshell. Yeah.
So, I met you when you were at Bissell, right? So how did you do a transition, or because you were in industrial design background, and then you're also now in user experience, right?
Yeah, it's funny. So when I was at Bissell, so for those that don't know Bissell is a floor care company. And I was with Bissell for a number of years designing things that suck, or things that help people clean.
Vacuum. Yes.
Yeah, vacuums, right. Yeah. I was with Bissell, and towards the end of that career path, everything was moving into the connected space. I actually ran, aside from having some experience learning in PolyU, I also taught in Hong Kong Polytechnic University. And I was running a course, different disciplines. Some were more business oriented, like guerrilla business, where some of them were more around staging experiences, and this particularly this program was around community, and how could we stage a community experience. And I was working with Professor Jan Buring, and
can you explain about what a staging experience is?
Staging experiences, meaning the experience economy. It started in the Hard Rock Cafe era, where it's not just a restaurant, it's the Hard Rock Cafe restaurant. And in the connected world, that becomes a lot easier, where you can put the connectivity in context with the business in a customizable way. And so some of the concepts that came out of that study was that, Bissell could create environments to facilitate the pet branding image, for instance. And was really big on pets. And so I was piloting.
Yeah, just clarify. Yeah. So is it the vacuum cleaners that are connected with some sort of apps, is that the customer experience?
That's one of the touch point. But to be community driven is more about what can your app do, and how do your device get connected so that the brand understands these personas.
Okay.
Yeah, and so yes, every product will be connected to an app, but the app could also be connected to a broader ecosystem. It could be connected to stores. It could be connected to chains of different businesses. So forming the B2C into B2B, and in between B2B to C to B, you know, so the connected space have that interesting window where the before business model is, okay, I'm connecting to the retail chain and the retail chain helps me sell the goods. But with connected goods, I could sell to different types of retail chain. It doesn't have to be big box anymore. It could be a vet that also sells pet supplies. And how would the user know that the vet is carrying this type of products?
Okay.
Space could allow and enable that. So that was the type of community idea that I was wrapped around, and I wanted to get Bissell involved, and that's how this whole digital career started.
So it's also connected to e-commerce, that means, right?
Right, and that was in the early beginning. I think people were just starting to pick up the momentum of selling in e-commerce, like selling through Amazon. I guess the ratio was drastically different for some of these big box driven brands, where, you know, it was very hard for them to all of a sudden become e-commerce focused. And so, of course, now it has leveled up, but still comparatively is very hard. So I then wanted to see what was the other side like. What would be someone that is completely driven by e-commerce? So I actually moved to Hong Kong and I joined this other organization called Nixplay.
Nixplay, right?
Yeah. So Nixplay is a digital photo frame that actually went IoT. So everyone knows digital photo frames that start with an SD card.
Yeah.
And the SD card era is gone because nobody is really using SLR anymore. All your pictures and memories lives on the phone. And so they had created a very offering of easily managing the digital content on your mobile phone to a picture frame. And this is kind of like a private channel. It's not like your social media. It's not like Instagram or Facebook where you post and everyone could see. This is more like what you want in your living room.
Yeah.
And so you could take a photo, you send, and it could show up in, you know, your father's house in, you know, another location, or your partner's house in another location, or your office. So you could have a multiple frame and have an ecosystem there.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and they are 90% Amazon. Yeah, so
hopefully you don't send the wrong photos to your friends and family.
Well, so that's interesting because you want to be sure who you're connected with to your frame, and what kind of privileges do you allow those people to have in your living room frames or in your bedroom frame. And
okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So what did you mentioned, like, you joined this company because you wanted to learn more about, is it e-commerce or the community?
Well, I joined this company because there were several things that they did very differently. They were 90% e-commerce.
Okay.
Completely IoT. With internet, this product is non-existent. And it was very software driven. Although I was mainly around the industrial design touch point. But the user experience was heavily tied to the digital application.
Yeah.
And so then through that window and through that work environment, I was learning quite a bit around hardware, software, which some of the other companies, well, I would say many of the companies today don't understand IoT.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
And so now here at JCH, Johnson's Controls Hitachi, it is seeing the corporation leveling up to the IoT field. But I would say it is not easier for big companies to do IoT as well. It's just a very different way of doing IoT. And so continuously now that's been my IoT career.
Okay. Oh, can you say a little bit about Johnson Control? Like what kind of products do you guys produce?
Sure. So Johnson's Controls Hitachi, so maybe I explain two of them individually and then I put them together.
Sure.
So Johnson's Controls is a B2B focused company that outfits buildings for not only heating, cooling, ventilation, but also security and so cameras and water hydrant systems for emergencies. A host of products that they do that helps manage the entire building's system of air and so forth. And
is it from the developers? When the building is built, or from a consumer?
Yes. No, it's almost always B2B where you fit. So for instance, we work with universities or airports or someone like IFC in Hong Kong, like a big building, and we would do the entire building from scratch. And we have products called Metasys, which is a software that gives you an overarching view of everything that is happening in the building, including camera system, what temperatures are each rooms, what are the zones. So you get a very macro view.
So it's like smart buildings, basically, right?
Yeah, exactly. So smart buildings, and it's basically an all-in-one system. Where we do everything for the building from the start.
So you're looking at it from the user experience of how do you use the smart building? Like how do you experience it?
Yeah. So that is the Johnson's Controls business. And we don't have a lot of B2C presence, which is why Hitachi came in. Hitachi has a lot of technologies around air conditioners and home conditioners and smaller business air conditioners. And so from that, this joint venture came in, and this was about 5 years ago. And so the two companies became one and formed a hybrid where before they would be Johnson's Controls would be doing B2B. Hitachi was only doing B2C. Now both companies is doing B2B and B2C. So Johnson's Controls Hitachi facilitate small, medium scales B2B and B2C market.
Okay, I see. So one of the reasons why I wanted to hone in on your, background is because I think right now there are still a lot of industrial designers in the market that are trained like product design, right? And we want to get into UX, right? But they don't know how. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between industrial design skill sets versus user experience? Like what are their similarities and differences, and how to make the first step?
That's a good one. So there are similarities and there are definitely differences. The similarity is the overview of how your brain works in terms of starting with empathy and defining the problem, ideating, and then prototyping and testing. The design thinking process is in parallel.
Yeah.
I would say for industrial designers to go into UI UX space is probably easier than the reversal. I know little to none that has made where you're a UI UX person and you went to industrial design.
Right.
But I've seen architects or industrial designers moving into the UI UX space. In the big area of design, I say is very similar. How you do research, how you understand personas and user profiles, the methodologies of design is similar.
Okay.
The technical space is very different.
Okay. You talk about the skill sets needed?
The skill sets, actually, some of them are migratable from industrial design, but it's a different type of focus. So I say in design, we govern several attributes from the core. You have an expertise in aesthetics, the perception of beauty. You more or less govern craftsmanship, how things are made, put together, how well they're put together, the dexterity that requires the assembly of your design. And that constitutes to the overall quality. But then in between that, there's usability. And the usability, different from user experience, the usability of the different components making up the design is different. And I'm talking about elements, elements making the design. So say, for instance, industrial design is form-driven, it's physical. So immediately that is the difference where the touch points and the process of creation requires you to jump in between 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional. So the production space is also very different from the conceptual space. So in conceptual space, you're sketching, you're CADing, you are, maybe writing, and then when you go into the physical space, you are shaping and you're forming it. The actual manufacturing production is remote from the creator. It is somewhere else. It's maybe in China or somewhere away from. But 3D printing, and of course, it's changing. But I would still say that you need to make the transition from 2D to 3D, and often back and forth. For UX, it's more around cognitive, where we're thinking about the user stories. You're defining the user flow. You're creating information architecture so that you can create this journey. And when you create the journey, then you define the visual elements, how does the actual visual engagement looks and feel like, and then you prototype, and the production space in the agile backend, or when you enter sprint, is actually could be in the same environment. If you code, you could be doing it all in the same screen. And so I think that's the core difference. Manufacturers of physical products is tool and die in a very different environment, requires large physical space. For UI UX, you could code on an iPad. And yeah, and you know, you could execute your product, launch it, sell it, all in the same environment. And I think for industrial designers, that is pretty hard to grasp.
Okay. Well, if it's the user experience of IoT, it also involves the physical aspect of the.
Yes. So IoT is somewhat in between, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So IoT is where I need the software before the hardware.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's also the sequence that people often don't understand. If I want to design a button on the industrial design that says on off, I need to know that there's a button to turn on off. And I need to know, okay, say for instance, it's for turning on off Bluetooth. So I need the hardware to work before I have the button to work.
Yes.
So it's the software, and then the hardware, and then the industrial design. So they need to work together. For instance, we're working on different technologies right now. I can't mention too much of it, but they require us to constantly rethink how does it influence the physical aspect if I choose this type of technology, which has limitations. So this is why your iPhone has a band around the aluminum housing, because when you integrate Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi could not go out of a metal housing. So you need a band around so that the signal could go through. Now, for those that don't design a connected product, you would never think that, oh, this is not just an aesthetic element. This is actually a functional element.
So it's a function.
Yeah, so they are interconnected, but it requires deep team collaboration to uncover these issues before. Just imagine, like, if the teams don't talk and you launch a product, it's like, oh, I thought all I need to do is put all the technology, but in reality, as the technology has perimeters that all the stakeholders of the functions needs to be aware of. Yeah.
So for people, because we've seen a lot of people who wants to do career change from industrial design to UX. What's your best recommendation for them to do? Like, where do they gain this knowledge apart from going back to school for a master's degree? You know?
Yeah. So I can't say I went to UI UX school, but I would say don't let UI UX scare you. You've lived with digital products all your life. You know, like if you've used a computer, you've used software. You lived with the evolution of Windows and Mac, the evolution from, you know, a key phone to a smartphone, to how products are now digital and physical. And I think that was that was the biggest issue.
Where did you learn all the
product designers? Sorry.
Where did you learn all the methodologies though?
So the methodologies apply from your industrial design education, I have to say.
Yeah.
Or
I
I felt
customer
that,
journey, like user journey is less in industrial design, right? And interaction flow and, you know, wireframing and all these.
So I say it is less because of the maturity of either the designer or the environment that they worked in that didn't enable them to get a better understanding and to how to engage with the customer. It doesn't have to be. I would say I design a physical product in a very similar manner than I design a digital product, where I still need to understand who I'm looking to design for. What is your solution statement in the context of the segmentation? or in the specific context of use. So all of these things are still very applicable.
Okay.
And yeah.
So we've heard in the market, because we run IXDA, Interaction Design Association in Hong Kong, right? So there are many employers who are looking for UX people, but we constantly hear that they say it's very hard to find experienced people, right? Especially in Hong Kong and China, mainland China. But then at the same time, there are a lot of people who wants to get into the industry, right? So there sounds to me there's a market gap going on. So what are the kind of skill sets that you're looking for when you're hiring?
Good question. So I think there are lots of people looking to get into the job as true. You scroll through job sites and you see a flourish of people looking for UI UX. But maybe I think people can't find them. They're either taken or they're not connecting in the right way. So people that have done UI UX for a long time typically come from the web space. They were called the web designer.
Yeah.
Right. So I think web designer was more of a common term maybe 20 years ago. Every web designer I know as a UI UX designer or an interaction designer. And they overlap in various ways. But if you think about the space or this career path, it's relatively young. UI is relatively young. As a label, not as a career path. I think the skill set and the people doing it existed long ago. The label is new. I would say that it happened, holy cow, in the Atari days, where you started to create and provide a digital interface. So I think people exist. You just need to move away from the label of UI UX and look at the skill sets and how they have worked in the past. So that, yeah.
Can you mention like the top 3 skill sets that you're looking for?
So for UI UX designer, there's the hard skills and the soft skills.
Okay.
So I'd start with the hard skills because people are probably more curious around, what tools should I learn and so forth. So, you either know some sort of UI interfacing skills like Sketch, InVision, Adobe XD. I think some people still do illustrators. But those are some of the, some of the other hard skills. I do see a lot more people getting into the technical space for UI UX. So full stack, where they also do some coding for front end. And that is highly valued. Now, again, going back to industrial design, it is almost normal for an industrial design to do some level of intuitive engineering. Like you just need to know how your components come together. I find that UI UX is not in that space as much. Where I find a lot of the UI UX designers, they do a lot of journey and research, but they don't do the technical aspect. So it is a pure handoff. Okay. And often they don't have a good understanding of the feasibility. Okay. And so what I would be looking for is, well in advance that is feasible. This is how you can represent to the organization that you are more mature in the proposition that you create is not just flair. It can be real.
Right.
And of course, conceptually, we can all think outside of the box, but eventually you're also responsible to become reality. Like that's what we do. We make it real. Otherwise, it's just, you know, a form of art that have limited capacity to use. Sorry, that didn't come out right. Art has lots of capacity to use, but in production use. Yeah.
Okay. So in terms
sorry,
of soft skills,
to add one more, the soft skills. Now, the soft skills are actually more important than hard skills.
Okay.
So I was listening to a podcast, Joshua Seedon, by Design Better podcast, and he was talking about outcome versus output, and in that world where we need designers to not just be the masters of screens, them to also lead. We need them to facilitate in a team environment. Need them to help collaboration and to help idea generation, to get different ideas out so that you embellish the final offering and get alignment. To help build empathy, to help other peoples that were non-design stream driven to understand why we do things the way we do, like taking them to a user research session to see through the same lens and understand, why design is done that way rather than being. Yeah.
So would you say communication skills? Yeah. Is it like convincing, like persuasion skills?
Yes. So these interpersonal skills are not really written on a resume that I could get out of, a couple of hours or a day worth of chat. Really has to do with, this person's level of engagement with human beings.
Yeah.
Because design is an activity for human beings, right?
I think that is one key point that usually designers miss because they think their portfolio will get the job.
Yeah.
What are the major skills that they're missing that you find when you interview candidates nowadays?
So let's start with the portfolio. I think a lot of people doesn't put enough emphasis on the portfolio. A portfolio that only shows you very finished products is a pretty bad one, because a portfolio that doesn't tell me how you work is a red flag. I think maybe as an introduction, you can talk about your final outcome, but during an interview per se, employer is really looking for how work with you in the future. And so hopefully the pieces that communicates in the portfolio also articulates you as a person, your values, and how you work and how you enjoy certain things, what are your weak spots, and so it is a part of you.
So they have to lay out their whole design process, right? From beginning, how they came up with that idea, and then finally the great looking.
Yeah. For instance, for example, a lot of people emphasize sketching as an element that is important. Why is it important though? It is not about how well you sketch, like how nice the lines look, and how clean they are or how presentable they are. It is how you think. And if you can communicate low fidelity, which sketch is a low fidelity output, that means you are interactive as a person. And you are a revealed person where I would do all the work and I show you the last minute. So I was also listening to someone say that the expectation of someone taking away the work for 2 weeks is very different from someone that shows something after half an hour or 15 minutes. Sketching enables that. So if I have regular sketching and regular interaction, that means you're very close to being in the collaboration area.
Yeah. So really, sketching is a communication tool, you know, among team members, right? Yeah. It's very true. I think a lot of times designers actually don't even know that, you know, these kind of soft skills are needed to find a job, right? A good job, right? Yeah. Okay. So sketching, communication, persuasion, you know, facilitation, right? That is what I'm hearing. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. And and especially in mainland China, I mean, I was pretty shocked to find out that a lot of industrial designers in mainland China, they pay a lot of money for coaching on how to sketch to get into universities.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's not about the thinking
in the wrong way. I think so. The China learning education system has a very unique way of learning where they pride on learning the difficult aspects first. So the assumption is that if you can do the difficult part, then you can do it all. And the issue with that is that you remove the contextual aspect of learning out of that. It is if that, then this, you know. So meaning, if I can sketch very well of this, doesn't necessarily mean I could do other things as well. This is true for driving skills. Going into a driving school, you're taught to learn how to park, parallel park. You have to reverse park in a beam where your wheels have to be perfectly aligned and roll onto these metal bars. And if you slip, you fail. Sketching is also one thing. Like I know someone that is teaching in the Chengdu University, and she was using some examples of what to use for practice sketching. And at the time, she was using one of my vacuum cleaners, because a vacuum cleaner is relatively hard to sketch. You know, practice the oval, or practice the different silhouettes on geometry, because there's a lot of ergonomics involved. There's a lot of assembly of architecture involved. So it's not the easiest thing to draw, but that won't help you in the UI UX space.
Right.
Learning how to draw a vacuum cleaner and learning how to draw a screen, for instance, is completely different, like just completely different. The UI UX designer is drawing so that I can get to, I could navigate the user. It's more about navigation, usability, and the flow, and less about how the line looks, you know. Well, there are some, you know, oh yeah, it's the right radius or the wrong radius.
Yeah, it's how the experience like unfolds over time, right?
I would say for those people learning how to sketch, learn the fact that it's a communication tool, and effective sketching is effective communication, meaning I would hardly need some text. You know, a picture would be 1,000 words. So you're drawing it in the way that I understand the problem that you're trying to solve. So storyboarding, for instance, drawing scenarios, instead of writing it, I can now illustrate it. So that is where the value of drawing and sketching is. Of course, there are different fidelity of sketching. You can sketch very high fidelity and it looks fairly real. I've worked with some designers that can draw and it looks real. It's really good. And so that is more of an industrial design realm.
Okay.
UX, the high fidelity is almost always going to be driven by the software rather than the hand manual labor.
Okay. So last question is, what kind of trends do you see happening in the industry, and like how should people adapt to those trends coming up?
Trends in what space?
In terms of like AI is coming up, right? Big data, right?
Right.
Or maybe there are other trends that, or VR or AI.
So
AR,
So those are all, I think, mainstream trends and up and coming. But for companies that is looking to mature in IoT, for instance, or I think of maturity as in how well can design be represented, and the trend is still very much towards how can designers be more involved in representing the consumer's voice. Now, big data has been a trend for a long time, but I would argue that not many companies getting into the digital space understands how to use big data, analytics. How does analytics drive product roadmap? How does that puzzle fit together? So for me, yes, there are all kinds of trends, but I'm less concerned about technologies evolving trend, where I think technologies will continue to evolve. AR, VR, Google Glasses, all the hardware will continue to evolve.
Well, I guess where I'm getting at is like, are these technologies going to be replacing designer skills? For example, like maybe 20 years ago, being a web designer is fine, right? But nowadays there's Wix, and strikingly that maybe hiring a full-time web designer is no longer, that valuable, right? So some technologies are replacing certain design skills. And do you see that happening?
That's true. Going back to that example, some designers will be less valuable if the investors are not looking for native creations. A lot of companies are starting off non-native. They buy templates. They have they have a Frankenstein model of just kicking off something, and then they want to test in the field using this idea. So that's one way. That's one business model. Corporations don't do that so much because the brand image is important. So they pay a lot of attention to how does the holistic visual brand language come together in the various touch points of design so that they are representative of the brand.
Right.
And so for designers that are skilled in their crafts, that way, in that area, you still have a lot of value. Yeah, but I want to answer your question on the trend. I think we can never really fully own trend. Trend is, infinitely fast. But what designers could do is have a macro view of how it affects their career path. For instance, you just know that IoT is not a trend that is going away. is here to stay, and the business is only growing to be bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So, for those that are not getting in the space, it represents a blue ocean opportunity.
Right.
But for those that are already in the space, how do I mature it? So that's, yeah.
Do you think the big data that's, and big data analysis can replace the more qualitative kind of understanding users, like user research?
No. Qualitative and quantitative will continue to coexist. So big data has so analytics and quant have some drawbacks, that ethnography will always give you more deeper insights. Say, for instance, I look at a dashboard and it tells me there's a success rate to this click or this function being registered, 90% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea how long did it take to register. Say, for instance, did it take 10 times to once, or did it take 5? And how long did each registration took? Only qualitative research could tell you that, because through observation, you can find out that user journey. But the big data will tell you, oh yeah, it's working. But if nobody is expressing their frustration, then you don't really know. So qual is really there to evaluate actual behavior. And
so how do people continue to do qual research with COVID and all this remote and not be able to observe? Like, do you guys adapt in some ways?
It's more expensive, that's for sure. So now in the back of my mind, COVID will go away. Eventually we will see the light of day and COVID will be forever gone. But I have to say, for now, we need to utilize digital tools. For UI UX, remote has been a working habit since day one, because of the environment for content creation that happens on a screen. So to do remote qual, to go into seeing how maybe a user testing session could happen on a screen. But say I would have some physical models and I need some ergonomics evaluation to happen in different parts of the world with different stakeholders and different types of demographic users. This has become, the story of our hardest part of our career journey.
Right.
Yeah, because all of a sudden, if you have some very explicit launch dates, now I need simultaneous feedback. And simultaneous feedback means I need models to be evaluated simultaneously. And where travel isn't allowed, I'd imagine, so I was evaluating a tool, Ultra Haptics. So Ultra Haptics uses ultrasound to create a physical environment in a non-physical space. So it's basically a haptic board, and then you could put your hand in there and you could feel the object. So they were using that to navigate the space of automotive, for instance, where you're driving, but you don't want to look at your center stack. And so you're turning knob in a virtual environment. So you'd put it in the car and you could stick your hand in midair and the ultrasound will give you a sense of touch on your fingertips. But it's still very relatively new, this tech, and it's very expensive. But I imagine technologies or trend of these technologies coming up like this will really help the industrial design stream to do remote evaluations.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. That's really cool. So I know you have to go. So thank you so much, Lawrence, for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Yeah, we all learned a lot from you. Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
大家如果中意呢集嘅話咧，就請你呢個 share 俾大家啦，咁跟住 like 啦，同埋 subscribe。咁有咩 comment 咧，就可以寫下面話俾我聽，你再想聽啲咩，咁我就可以 interview 多啲人噶啦。